Before you listen, if you enjoy the stories and want to hear more, please consider subscribing to the channel. Most of you listening are not currently subscribed, so take this opportunity to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications to never miss a story. Thank you. When I was 4 or 5 years old, my mother and I visited my grandparents for the weekend. My father was not present in my life. My grandparents played a significant role in my upbringing, and we would often stay with them from Friday to Sunday. These visits allowed my mother to have some time for herself or work extended hours at her job. One dark Sunday evening during the holiday season, I recall being carried to the car, half asleep. I do not remember leaving, as I must have dozed off immediately after being strapped into my car seat. However, I woke up feeling the cold on my face, and my mother was crying and pleading with someone not to hurt her because I was in the car. When I looked outside, I saw what I initially believed was a monster, but it was a man wearing a detailed and creepy bunny mask. The mask resembled the one worn by the slasher movie character in You're Next. The man's partner had parked their car in the middle of the road, making it seem like he had crashed. When my mother pulled over to help, his accomplice appeared wearing a ski mask and proceeded to rob us. The masked men did something unspeakable to my mother, which nearly took her life both physically and emotionally. She spent almost 2 weeks in the hospital, and I lived with my grandparents for nearly a year since she was in and out of different facilities. I suffered from nightmares about the bunny monster chasing my mother for years, and the image was ingrained in my memory. As time passed, things got better, and our life became more normal. By the time I was in my double-digit years, we had moved on from our past struggles. Fast forward to when I was 24 years old, and I had secured a decent paying job after college. I was living with my mother, but looking for my apartment. Since the place came unfurnished, I searched for cheap furniture and decor on Craigslist. I came across some attractive items being sold at bargain prices and contacted the seller, who turned out to be the granddaughter of the owner, a man who was selling his belongings to pay for his care home. The granddaughter promised me a discount if I bought a bunch of stuff in bulk, which suited me as I needed a lot of items fast. We arranged for me to check out the items at her grandfather's place before making the purchase. One Saturday afternoon, I drove over to the house and met the granddaughter, who was very kind. However, when I saw her grandpa, I realized why they needed the money for his care home. He was in terrible condition and couldn't move from his wheelchair. He had an oxygen tank and barely reacted to our introduction. He looked like he didn't have much time left. I examined the 3 main items on my list: a closet, a desk, and a dinner table, and the granddaughter and I agreed on a price for them. I arranged to rent a U-Haul to pick them up the following weekend after we confirmed the purchases. After completing the purchase, the granddaughter and I had coffee together. She explained that almost everything in the house was for sale since her grandpa had been a wild child in his youth and had been in and out of jail. Although he led a more regular life after his last prison stint, he hadn't saved much for a rainy day. It was a sad story, and the girl went on to say that everything piled into the garage was also for sale. I thought I might buy a few more things from them, maybe knickknacks or whatever they couldn't sell easily, to decorate my apartment while the money went to a worthy cause. We finished the coffee, the girl went to help her grandpa, and I headed out to the garage to check out the pile of things. It was a literal mountain of what they considered garbage, but I thought I could find a home for some of the items like old cookie jars, books, and weird little ornaments. As I was sifting through the pile, placing some of the items I'd considered buying to one side, I suddenly spotted something that froze me in place. The thing that had been bright white was now dirty gray-brown, and the paint in the eyes and mouth was old and peeling. But then, slowly and surely, I recognized what it was. It was something that had featured in probably hundreds of nightmares I'd had as a kid. It was something that had traumatized me and my mom for years and years and years. I saw a bunny mask with the exact same design as the one worn by the man who nearly took my mom away from me. I stared at it for a few seconds before stumbling back in disbelief. I tried to convince myself that it couldn't be the same mask, since it looked like a mass-produced Easter bunny mask, but the pieces started to fall into place. It made sense, considering my grandpa's frequent incarcerations. After composing myself, I gathered the mask from the trash pile and went into the house. I put on a fake smile and paid for the items, then asked the girl what her grandpa had gone to jail for. She was surprised and didn't know the exact reason, only that it was something he was ashamed of. I requested to thank the man personally, even though the girl warned that he may not be able to hear or respond. I remained composed and insisted on thanking him, despite the girl's apparent discomfort. She must have found my behavior strange, but she still allowed me to visit her grandpa's room to express my gratitude. I did my best to maintain composure, but as I reached the man's bedroom door, my hand trembled as I turned the handle. When I entered, he sat in his wheelchair, facing a TV, but not really watching it. He appeared to be staring into space. I sat on the bed beside him, gathering my thoughts before asking my first question. I wondered why I was there and what I hoped to accomplish. I asked him where he was living in December of 1987, but he didn't respond or even acknowledge me. He just stared ahead, unresponsive. I wanted to leave, afraid that my questions would upset the sick old man. However, the scared little girl in me wanted answers and didn't want to be afraid anymore. I hoped he would say something, anything, about the bunny mask I had found in the garage. To my surprise, I didn't need his words to know he could hear me. Without thinking, I asked him if he had robbed a woman with a child in her car around Christmas that year. His eyes shifted from their fixed position on the wall, but this time he wasn't staring into oblivion. He appeared to be lost in thought, perhaps remembering. I had mentioned to him that his granddaughter had disclosed to me that he had spent time in prison, although she did not disclose the reason why. I spoke a falsehood when I told him that I knew it was him. However, his reaction confirmed my suspicions, as he remained silent, and his jaw quivered as though he were trying to speak but unable to do so. Normally, anyone else would have become defensive, angry, or confused, but his demeanor was filled with remorse, even though he was physically incapable of effectively communicating. Tears welled up in his eyes as his frustration at not being able to speak seemed to overwhelm him. I interpreted his response to be one of regret, but I couldn't say for certain whether he wanted me to leave him alone or if he was apologizing. Nevertheless, before I departed, I had one last thing to say to him. You almost destroyed my life. You don't deserve to be sitting in that chair. As I stood up and walked out, he let out a whimper. When his granddaughter caught up to me to express her gratitude, I concealed my emotions by telling her that we had a profound, heartfelt conversation filled with gratitude and that I hoped I had not upset him. I suppose she found it touching, and I sincerely hope she never discovers the truth. After I got back into my car, I only drove for 2 blocks before pulling over and bursting into tears. I was filled with uncertainty and doubt, worried that I had caused distress to a sick elderly man. But another voice in my head kept saying, it was him. I know it was him. It had to be him. After regaining my composure, I drove over to my mom's place to share the news. We both cried together when she confirmed that she also believed it was the same guy who attacked us. I asked if anyone had been caught for what happened to us, and she informed me that the culprit had been sent to jail as a result, and she had to testify in court. I had no idea anyone had been caught for it, and I grew up knowing better than to bring it up with my mom. If it wasn't for that chance encounter, I still wouldn't have spoken to her about it. Part of me wondered if she'd even believe me, but it was only when I described what the guy looked like that it clicked for her. At first, she refused to believe it, but it seemed like the perfect karma for the guy, almost too perfect of an end to the story. Endings like that don't happen very often in life. In the months that followed, it felt like a great weight had been lifted from our shoulders. Nothing could change the past or undo the trauma we both experienced, but knowing the guy was suffering was almost like proof that there was a divine justice. It might sound a little unhinged, but I can't think of another way to phrase it. I still don't believe in happy endings, and I still think the world is a cold, cruel place. but from experience, I know that divine justice does exist. Allow me to recount how I developed social anxiety disorder. I used to work night shifts and sleep during the daytime. A few years ago, I woke up to some terrible news. My landlord had left numerous missed calls and unread text messages, urging me to call them as soon as possible. When I called my landlord back, they informed me that there was a leak in the apartment below mine, and they believed it was coming from my apartment. Consequently, they had shut off the water supply to my apartment while I was asleep. I couldn't take a shower, make coffee, or even flush my toilet. The only solace was that I found a plumber who would repair the leak and reimburse me if I kept the receipt or invoice. By the time I learned about the water being turned off, it was already about 3 in the afternoon, which was nearing the end of most people's working hours. I contacted several emergency plumbers who might have been able to address the issue quickly, but they were all too busy to accept the job. Eventually, I called some friends to see if I could stay with them until the problem was resolved. Fortunately, one of my girlfriends welcomed me into her home and suggested that I search on Craigslist for someone who was not a professional plumber but knew enough about plumbing to assist me. I didn't have high hopes for finding a solution on Craigslist. I assumed that most people only use the site to sell things or arrange CD hookups. However, I hadn't visited the site frequently. To my surprise, there was a section in the site's services category called Household. As I scrolled down, I came across the third post, which read 37-year-old handyman looking for work. The post stated that he knew a little bit about everything and was available to take on jobs at short notice for low prices. It sounded too good to be true, and it turned out that it was. I called the number provided in the post and explained my situation. I expected him to turn me down like the others, but to my surprise, he was happy to come out that evening to see if he could fix the leaky pipe and turn my water back on. I felt like all my prayers had been answered. He even said it sounded like a simple job and was amazed that no other plumber had come out to deal with it already. I knew nothing about plumbing, so when he mentioned opening up the floorboards, I believed it was a simple process. About an hour after my initial phone call, the guy arrived at my apartment and informed me that he was outside. I realized that I had forgotten to inform the handyman about my apartment number, so I gave him the details and let him in. Tony appeared legitimate, and I showed him to the bathroom, where the leak was suspected to be coming from. I returned to my TV room and continued making my delayed breakfast, as I worked night shifts at the time. A few minutes later, Tony called me back into the bathroom and asked if the pipe looked correct. I walked over to the bathroom, took a quick look, and the next thing I remember is waking up to a bright light shining on my face. A paramedic was checking to see if I was conscious or not, and I was confused and panicked. They instructed me to remain still as they arranged a stretcher to move me from my apartment. They wheeled me out to the hallway, where my friend who had agreed to let me stay with her was waiting, crying, and asking if I was okay. I relaxed and sank into the stretcher, hearing the paramedics assure my friend that I would be fine. I felt like sleeping for days, but the paramedics urged me to stay awake, telling me that falling asleep with a head injury could be deadly. They asked me questions to keep me engaged during the ride to the hospital, and I am pretty sure they gave me medication to prevent me from nodding off. When I arrived at the hospital, the police came to take a statement from me about the handyman. They had discovered several missing valuables during their investigation, including my TV that had been removed from its mount on the wall. After finding my bedroom completely ransacked and all my jewelry gone, I finally realized that the person who claimed to be a plumber was actually a cunning handyman who used his job as a cover to rob people. One of the officers informed me that I was the 4th victim of this same man that month, but he had never been caught because he used different phone numbers and did not reveal much about himself. Although the authorities were trying to catch him, he managed to pull off a few robberies before stopping after a warning was issued about anonymous handymen on the internet. However, there is a chance that he is still out there, robbing and eluding the authorities. Unfortunately, I did not recover from the incident as easily as the other victims. I developed severe anxiety that I did not expect and could not shake off. I barely left my house, and even the simple task of receiving food deliveries made me nervous. The unfamiliar presence of anyone outside my apartment or in the hallway would make me feel itchy and tense, and I found myself constantly checking through the peephole with the gun I bought, hoping to catch a glimpse of the person who robbed me. Although I knew I would never see him again, I couldn't help but feel scared. The attack left me with a scar on my jawline, and I am unsure if it will ever heal completely. Along with the physical scar, I also have many emotional scars that people cannot see, and I hope that others who were victimized by this man have been able to move on from what happened to them. In April of 2010, a man named Jim Sanders posted an advertisement on Craigslist to sell a small diamond ring. Jim resided in the city of Edgewood, Washington, with his wife Charlene and their 2 sons, aged 14 and 10. Soon after the post was uploaded, an interested party contacted Jim and arranged to view the ring in person at his home, with the intent to negotiate a price. On the evening of April 28th, a man and a woman arrived at the Sanders residence, the same individuals who had called ahead to schedule the meeting. Charlene Sanders remembers them being friendly and a seemingly cute couple who thought the ring would be a perfect Mother's Day gift. After agreeing on a price, Jim asked how they would like to pay, revealing that they had no intention of doing so. The man drew out a firearm, catching Jim off guard, and demanded the ring. While the exchange occurred, the woman rushed to the back door, allowing 2 additional accomplices to enter the home. The entire Sanders family was corralled into the TV room, made to kneel, and have their hands tied behind their backs. The robbers demanded Jim and Charlene reveal the location of additional valuables, while Charlene had a gun held to the back of her head with a countdown of 3. I'm just screaming and my kids are standing there, saying, "Please God, don't let them kill me. Don't let them kill my kids," Charlene Sanders later recalled. The robbers then proceeded to ransack the home in search of anything worth stealing, as they knew that the longer they remained, the greater their chances of being apprehended by law enforcement. One of the robbers acted as a crowd controller in the living room, but it became evident that he was excessively forceful and intimidating. His threats to execute Jim and Charlene were so convincing that their 2 sons became inconsolable with fear, wailing at the top of their lungs. The robbers grew concerned that the neighbors might hear the commotion, and the crowd controller began threatening the boys with beatings unless they remained quiet. This only exacerbated their agitation, and their sobs grew even louder. The robber became incensed at their disobedience and made good on his promise to beat the children mercilessly, as their parents were forced to watch a living nightmare unfold before their eyes. Charlene Sanders reacted by offering her wedding ring to prevent her children from being beaten, and the robbers ripped it off her finger. That night was horrific, Charlene said. "We just kept saying, just take what you want, just take what you want, don't kill us." Jim Sanders, on the other hand, had a different reaction to the sight of his children being beaten. Although initially pragmatic about the home invasion and ransacking, Jim became consumed by a burning rage when the robbers began hurting his most precious possessions. Breaking free from a tightly secured zip tie, especially when binding a person's wrists behind their back, can be incredibly difficult. In a surge of pure anger, Jim Sanders somehow managed to break free from the tight plastic zip tie. In any other situation, he would have known better than to charge towards an armed robber, but he was consumed by rage. Screaming and running towards his son's attacker, Jim felt like a hero from the movies, but the reality was far different. Despite his efforts, the gunman managed to step back and shoot Jim 3 times before he even got close. For Charlene Sanders, it was the most devastating moment of her life. She begged Jim to stay with her, but he was gasping for air and barely holding on. Charlene knew that her husband had died protecting their family, and she was grateful that they were still alive. Even though she could speak of the incident now, Charlene was beyond traumatized at the time. The men responsible for Jim's death were also struggling to come to terms with what had happened. They realized that they had lost control of the situation, and the consequences of their actions were far more severe than they could have ever imagined. While a non-violent home invasion might have been easy to sweep under the rug, the murder of Jim Sanders would be relentlessly pursued by the police. In the end, the robbers escaped the bloody crime scene with various valuable items such as cell phones, a laptop computer, and jewelry. Knowing the intense heat that was about to follow, they fled south through Oregon until they reached California's northern border. Several homicide detectives were assigned to the case, and soon they discovered that the robbers had made a critical mistake. They had communicated with Jim Sanders using an email account linked to one of their real names. The suspects were later featured on America's Most Wanted television show and identified as Cleben Bernard, Joshua Reese, Kiyoshi Higashi, and Amanda Knight, 4 heroin addicts who had the audacity to remove the front license plate from the car they used to escape Washington. Shortly after they approached San Francisco, they were subjected to a traffic stop and quickly apprehended. In court, the suspects wept as they were charged with 1 count of first-degree murder, 2 counts of robbery, 2 counts of assault, and 1 count of burglary. Each of them entered pleas of not guilty, expressing raw horror and outrage, and many believed it was a case of mistaken identity. However, piece by piece, prosecutors pieced the story together and proved beyond any doubt that the 3 men and 1 woman were responsible for Jim Sanders' murder. Finally, Charlene Sanders herself appeared in court and testified that there was no doubt in her mind that the 4 suspects were the ones who invaded her home and killed her husband. Her testimony led to the conviction of all 4 in 2011 on all charges, and they each received sentences ranging from 71 to 124 years in prison. While confined to prison, one of the suspects, Kiyoshi Higashi, expressed deep regret for Jim's murder and stated that he prayed for their family every night because no one deserved what had happened. However, when Pierce County Prosecutor Mark Lindquist was reached out for comment, he said, "Talk to Charlene Sanders about who it was that came into her house that night. It wasn't somebody sheepish. It was someone willing to hurt and maybe even kill innocent children. It was someone who had no problem taking their father's life before their very eyes."